Victim, 49-year-old Teresa de Jesus Cruz Rubio. And the suspect who was apprehended, 25-year-old Alejandro Gonzalez. So back on 9/27/2014 at about 11:41 p.m., officers received a call for service for an unknown trouble at the 4401 West Kime Drive address. The 911 caller stated that a family member was inside of the house and was deceased, and that the victim's head had been cut off. Officers arrived, and when they got there, the front door to the house was open. And as they appeared inside, they found the victim, who was underneath of a blanket inside the small apartment. Upon further looking through the apartment, they learned that the shower was still running and that there was blood throughout. They continued to look through the house to make sure there was nobody else still inside. And in the kitchen sink, they noticed there was a knife block with several knives located. So going back to how suspicion came about for this incident, is the family, the victim's sister to be specific, could not get a hold of the victim throughout the evening. She called her at about 3:40 p.m. and was able to speak to her on the phone. This all took place on the 27th, Friday. And the victim confirmed that she was going to appear and be at a family gathering that they had set up, ultimately which was a surprise birthday party for her. The victim failed to show up to the party, so the family became suspicious and began to try to look into the house and went over to the house to try to get a hold of her, to no avail. The doors were locked, the windows were locked, there was no sign of forced entry. So later in that evening, just before, I'd say approximately 11:30 p.m. in that time frame, they were able to make entry into the house with the assistance of a local locksmith, at which time that's when they located the victim. And right after that, they called police immediately thereafter, and officers responded. So during the investigation, with officers and detectives on scene, they learned that the victim, the sister, the woman who had called 911 and who was on scene, loaned the victim a burgundy GMC Yukon SUV, and that was missing from the residence. Police learned that the victim's son, Alejandro Gonzalez, lives with the victim and recently got out of jail for an unrelated matter for felony charges from another agency. And it was reported that he had mental conditions. Officers on scene noted that, again, that there was no signs of forced entry and all the doors and windows to the residence were locked. As detectives furthered their investigation, they learned that video surveillance in the area of nearby residences, as well as traffic cameras in the area, had located the GMC Yukon between the hours of 4:50 and 5 p.m. in the area of where the crime occurred, and Alejandro was observed driving the GMC Yukon. Upon further looking at video footage, Alejandro never returned to the residence. While processing the scene, detectives and identification technicians noticed that there was a knife located in the kitchen sink which appeared to have blood and hair on it. It also appeared that somebody may have attempted to clean the knives, but at this given time they weren't sure who. The victim suffered a full decapitation and had numerous stab wounds to her abdomen, chest, and arms, to which an autopsy will later be conducted. So as the investigation continued and detectives were on scene, they entered the GMC Yukon into the database as a stolen motor vehicle. And at about 2:40 a.m., a Phoenix Police Department officer located the vehicle near I-10 and 99th Avenue. Glendale detectives were contacted in regards to this Phoenix officer locating the car, at which time they went and began to surveil the area, at which time they saw Alejandro going to and from the GMC several times prior to taking him into custody at about 3:30 a.m. And this is now on the 28th, the following morning. So upon detectives getting a hold of Alejandro and taking him into custody, they noticed that he had evidence of blood on his body and clothes, along with injuries to his hands and arms. Alejandro was ultimately brought here to the main police station where detectives conducted an interview with him, at which time Alejandro went into detail and admitted to stabbing his mother and claimed to have cut her head off from her body. Alejandro also spoke during the investigation and during the interview about using methamphetamines. Alejandro claimed there was another suspect involved, but no evidence pointed to this as the detectives looked through the scene and all the evidence that they collected. However, detectives advised that the investigation is ongoing and they are looking into these claims of another suspect. I'm going to talk about the charges. So Alejandro, after the interview was completed, he was booked into the county jail system for murder of the first degree, premeditated, a felony, as well as theft of means of transportation, a felony crime. I just want to make sure everybody's aware that a press release with photo will be sent out after this press conference, as will a redacted Form 4 for you to review. With that, is there any questions that anybody might have?
So you mentioned that he had just been released from jail. Was it the same day that this happened, or what was the timeline?
I think it was before. We're not 100% sure on that, though. Yeah. I don't know the time.
And you mentioned that he did confess to officers that this was something that he did.
Mm-hmm.
Was there any remorse during this confession to officers at all?
No remorse that I read. It just sounded like, and you'll see in the Form 4, because they got into detail about his statements. He was making a claim of that other individual and gave some reasons as to why he did what he did with the victim, claiming that the victim was already stabbed, so that's why he did it afterwards, and made some claims about the other suspect. However, I didn't see the interview video, so I don't know what his remorse or mental state was during that.
So is the only motive, I read the Form 4, is the only motive at this point believed to be that someone else had already stabbed her and he was just...
He did make that statement. I don't know if that was his ultimate motive. I don't know if they got into the specific reason why. He claimed it was because of this other individual.
He said there were felony charges from a different organization.
Yeah.
Do you know what those were?
Not at this time, no. It was just, I know there were felony charges that he was charged with.
Can you say what department it was with?
I honestly, I don't know. Yeah, sorry.
Can you just talk about just how horrific this case is? Obviously, that sister walking in and seeing that discovery and
Oh.
the horrific nature of this.
Yeah, it's absolutely horrific. It's horrific to the family who had to endure this. It's horrific to the officers who had to go and see this, detectives who had to be out there, identification techs who had to process the scene and really get into it and in depth into it. It's horrific to and traumatic to people who live in the area, worried about what kind of crimes are happening in their community. If it was something random, ultimately we know it wasn't at this point. But at the time, it was probably very uneasy to the people who were in the area with all the police activity.
You mentioned mental illness.
Mhm.
Was that something that family members talked about, or was that documented in his case before?
Yeah, it was talked about by family members. I didn't read the previous charges case to know if it was previously documented or not.
You know, I guess when
Sure.
when you talk about that, and it sounds like it happened pretty quickly when you find him, you find the car, but what's that urgency level like when you know you've got somebody who's clearly maybe not in the right state of mind, but is capable of something this violent? I know there's that sense of urgency for officers as they try to hunt him down.
Very urgent to the department. Kind of all hands on deck type thing, getting multiple detective units involved to try to apprehend this individual. We use the help of our fugitive apprehension squad, and that's what they do, and they're very good at what they do. Doing the research, trying to locate him, searching areas, doing all of those types of things, so very urgent.
Did the family or anybody involved say that there was a history of violence with the suspect? Did anything, come out?
Not that I was information that it was given to me. Nothing about prior history or anything specifically with family, anything like that. Thank you.
Ford, just to kind of elaborate on what Sergeant Hoskin just said, I think that when you have a situation like this where an individual was capable of murdering his mother in such a heinous crime like he did, this is a person that's liable to create violence anywhere they go. So when you have a situation like this, all of our officers get involved, try to get this person off the street as quickly as they can, because the last thing that they want is to see another family victimized in this way. A question that, Emma, you had earlier, in the Form 4 you'll see where the other charges were from, and you would have to contact that agency for that information. I believe he had only been out of the jail system 24 hours when this had taken place.
Is there mental health resources available to the officers who had to process this scene?
Absolutely. This is something that is not only horrific for this family, but it's horrific for the officers who have to respond as well. This was a very gruesome, bloody scene. Our Victim Advocacy Center across the street not only works with our victims, but they also work with our officers as well. And there's also peer counseling and things of that nature that are available for the officers. Once again, when we get upstairs, we'll be releasing pictures of the victim and the suspect, as well as that redacted Form 4. Thank you, guys.